splash the cash. Last night it was revealed that they had bought in Kai Havertz. We're expecting a Declan Rice move, of course. There is Julian Timber as well. So it looks as though they're going to be spending a fair bit of money this summer. What does that mean then, do you think, for Arsenal, and in terms of, well, what's the minimum we should now expect of Arsenal if they're spending what appears to be, nearly £200 million?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a necessary evil to serve a greater good. I mean, I wrote a column in the Mail in May when the season was coming to an end and Arsenal had let go of the title and let Man City steal the march that they did, that there was a necessity to spend around about 250 million quid to get themselves to maintain their position within inside the top four, let alone enhance it. And ultimately, that's what they're doing. If you've got 100-odd million quid going on Declan Rice, if you've got 65 million quid going on Kai Havertz, and however much is going elsewhere, you're getting towards that sort of territory because the landscape has shifted for Arsenal now. Now you've got expectation back in the mix. Now you've got a platform that you believed you've built on, because I think a lot of people felt that even if they didn't succeed last year, that this was a great platform that they built, and these group of young players would build upon that, build their experiences and come back even stronger the following season. And I was in that camp. But when you start to see some of the frailties and fragilities, and I've said this on a number of occasions about at two ends of the pitch, when I went to the Emirates to watch Arsenal play Man City in that big game in about March, which they lost 3-1, for me it was like they had the ability to be able to negate some of Man City, but they didn't have the power up front to be able to put them to the sword. Because they didn't have enough offensive options, and Eddie Nketiah wasn't going to get you there. And then yet when they went to play them at the Etihad, the polar opposite had changed. Well, there was a different dynamic that they couldn't defend, and they weren't defensively strong enough. So it looked to me like both ends of the pitch needed to be dealt with. So that requires a significant amount of expenditure. And then you've got this, ensuing Champions League campaign. Now, if they were to go into the Champions League and not have a particularly successful campaign, which I'm not forecasting, but if it were to happen, it could undermine their league campaign because you carry momentum and confidence with you. So with that in mind, I thought it was an absolute necessity for them to even stand still, let alone push the envelope even harder with Man City, to be able to have to spend this kind of dough. And that's where we are, and that's what they're doing. And it's not necessarily saying I'm a soothsayer, because the big part of that is obviously Declan Rice. But I still think there is... The problem for me is there's so much of a gap, really, when it comes down to it, between those and Manchester City, that we're really looking at seeing if Man City decline, that's the opportunity, rather than necessarily the other sides get better. But I think what they've done is they've solidified the opportunity to be competitive inside the top four, probably with some of these decisions, and give themselves a foothold in having a decent European campaign, because that's, at the end of the day, what Arsenal need to be doing. Do they win the league next year with these signings? I don't think so.
But would there be an expectation that they have to at least win a trophy?
Well, I mean, every season starts with expectation, doesn't it? And ultimately, Arsenal should be in the conversation for all of the trophies, whether it's pushing Manchester City in the Premier League, which I don't think they will do. I don't think they will win the Champions League, but you never know with the kind of draws that they can get that might give them an opportunity. And certainly, there's no reason why Arsenal can't find their way through an FA Cup or a League Cup opportunity. It depends what the Arsenal fans feel that progress looks like. If progress in their minds is only overturning Manchester City, then I think they're going to be disappointed. But what it does show is that Kroenke, ever since the European Super League, ever since Daniel Ek came in and started suggesting that he'll pay 2 billion quid for Arsenal, ever since we've seen Chelsea get bought for 2.5 billion, United being touted at 5 billion, the seriousness and the preparedness for Stan Kroenke and his son to look at Arsenal, rather than being this sort of arm's length subsidiary of their American businesses like the LA Clippers or the Colorado Rapids, they've now looked at them in a different way, know they've got to invest, and they probably think with Arteta, they've got the guy that can take them in that direction. Edu's come slightly more of age, so I went to the game. I can remember going to Arsenal games, it's a City game I'm talking about, where the atmosphere inside the stadium, and people ridiculed it, was akin to a library at times. Arteta, whether you like his jumping jack-in-the-box routine, has got the fans and everybody at the club in a really collective spirit sort of mentality, and everybody at it, on it and across it. That'll carry him so far. But I still think that if the expectations are from the Arsenal fans that we're going to challenge for the league, I think they're going to find themselves a little disappointed.
Well, I mean, I think you're right with the progression in the sense of bringing unity back to that club that was clearly fractured for a while. Yeah. But also there has been progression in terms of where they finished in the table. They were, what was it, 8th, 5th, 2nd?
Absolutely.
But you can't just be the best of the rest. You have to still compete for everything else as well. And I'm sure Arsenal fans will go into this new season hoping that there'll be a trophy at the end of it, at the very least.
So they should.
With all the money that they have spent. Arsenal fans, let us know what you expect then from this coming season, with the fact that you now have Kai Havertz, Declan Rice, we expect that to go through, Julian Timber likewise as well. And with the Declan Rice situation, it might be interesting to hear what West Ham fans make of his impending departure. Do you look at him still as a legend? Let's not forget he lifted the Europa Conference League title last season. Or does it leave a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth that he is moving to another London club? Would you have preferred him to, I'm sure you would have preferred, but would you have liked him to have stayed on and just build on what West Ham have achieved from last season? Can you understand if some might have a little bitter taste?
There'll always be a section of fans that think people should stay for the rest of their life until they stop performing the way they think, then they should get out of the door as quick as they can. Look, I think most West Ham fans will look at it and say, he did a very good job for us. He was very committed to the cause. We've won a European trophy with him. And the economics of football are that we've got a lot of dough for him. I think they've made out like bandits. I think getting 105 million quid for Declan Rice, I don't care who doesn't like that narrative, they've done remarkably well. Now, of course, how that's deployed or redeployed is the important part of the equation. But I don't think really any rational thinking football fan, certainly West Ham fan, will look at it and go, well, we begrudge him the move. Where West Ham are in the food chain is they aren't a top 4 club, despite the protestations in the past of David Sullivan about how they were going to be a club that pushed on and there's no reason why they shouldn't be challenging the top 6. That's a tall order. You've got such a competitive landscape now. You've got the Villas of the world, the Newcastles of the world, Liverpool to reawake. Chelsea aren't going to finish 12th again. Spurs, I think, will get better, undeniably get better under Postecoglou because it's a low bar that's been set anyway with Conte's pitiful performance at the end of his tenure. So I think if West Ham fans are feeling ire about Declan Rice, then they're slightly misguided, because there isn't an obligation for someone to spend the rest of their natural born life at a football club, is there? He's done his job. Yeah. I always think loyalty extends as long as your contract details on what your job is to do. If you're there for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, it's your job to do the best 3 weeks, 3 months or 3 years you can. And I think most people would suggest that he's done that. Yeah. He's done that.
Well, Trevor in East London, thank you very much for your text. Rice deserves better than West Ham and definitely deserves better than Arsenal. So, okay. Trevor, not sure that Arsenal...
I think you deserve what you get. You get what
the best
you deserve
move,
in life.
He says. West Ham fans, what do you think? 03717 223344. We expect that this move will happen, with Arsenal then very much the front runners for this after Manchester City pulled out of the race to sign Declan Rice. As we know, Eni Aluko was on talkSPORT this week. She had some interesting views on the situation when it seemed City was still in this race. Let's just remind people what Eni Aluko had to say before we just chat about it.
There's a lot of cat and mouse going on here. As a sporting director, I used to do this a lot. So I used to call up a club, big club, and say, right, can you put in a bid in? And that would get my owner to basically put a higher bid in. It's a bit like an auction, isn't it? I don't think Manchester City actually want to sign Declan Rice. I think what's going on here is Arteta's picked up the phone to Pep, said, listen, Arsenal are going to do the sort of incremental bid approach. If you put a higher bid in, that will push my owner to I think there's a bit of that going on here.
What, for speed then? They just want it to happen quicker?
Well, for speed, but to get the deal done.
Well, it was interesting because after that, she was mocked for what she had to say. It could be a coincidence, but it looks as though maybe in part what she said was right, that the fact that Man City have pulled out, Arsenal now in the running to sign Declan Rice. So was she right all along?
Look, I mean, her experiences are working with transfers that are probably no more than 250,000 quid. So with due respect to her observation, when you start to get into territories of people spending 70, 80, 90 million quid, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a little fanciful. I'm not suggesting that you rule it out of the equation. I certainly wouldn't be delighted having a sporting director like any in my environment trying to get me to jack up the price so I can pay for something when she's supposed to be working for me. So I wouldn't be overly appreciative of that.
But colluding happens in football, surely.
I mean, look, yeah, it does, but not necessarily between clubs that are competing for something, not necessarily between clubs that are looking to maintain and retain a competitive advantage. There's no charity in this business. There's no charity between managers. They might give one another a hug before the game, but really and truly, they'll do whatever it takes to win something. And yes, you can make the idea and advance the notion that the Sorcerer's Apprentice has been given the opportunity to help himself along the way with a player that's going to compete with Man City. I don't think it's steeped in reality. I don't deny her experiences, because if they're her experiences, they're experiences. But there's a vast difference between, with due respect, the level of transfer fee that she might have been involved in and 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 million pound transfers. It's not relative, because the quantum of cash is so vast. You're talking about 25% of a club's turnover being spent on a player and people playing hide and seek with themselves to get a deal done. But come on.
Have you never, been chummy with a mate of yours, trying to help each other out in this sort of football world?
Well, I don't consider people in football my friends. I think most of the time they're your adversaries, and you're trying to do something to them in terms of doing better than they are. The only time I've ever tried to do something that made sense of a transaction was trying to buy Dean Ashton from Crewe, and suggested to Norwich, and I think it was West Bromwich Albion, that we all get together, rather than Crewe take our pants down and ratchet the price up. We all put a bid in that meets a reasonable expectation of Dean's worth, and the player chooses his club. And that lasted for about 7 seconds once Norwich and Delia had agreed and went a bid higher. So I can assure you that there's not a lot of camaraderie or collective thinking around how we can help one another benefit, how I can make sure my competition benefit.
You and Theo Pafita, so you've talked about many a time as a friend, you've never picked up the phone and said, Theo, I need a favour here.
The kind of favours that Theo would have done for me were the worst kind of favours. There was no favours there whatsoever. In fact, it was harder work doing deals with my several football players from Millwall propped up the finances of their football club and received no gratitude for it. So whilst I don't listen, it's not fair for people to parody and ridicule what she said.
Yeah.
I think it's slightly fanciful, and I think the timing of things is just coincidental. I don't think it's simply that Arsenal have been nudged over their owner's been nudged over the line, because there's two commodities in football that are absolutely front and foremost in everything that goes on: gossip and money. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, I very much doubt that people don't know what others are doing and don't know the reasons why they're doing it. And I very much doubt, although don't rule it out, that Arteta's been able to influence Pep and the finance directors and the technical directors and the people at Man City to prop up a transfer fee that helps Arsenal get it.
Yeah. I mean, in all fairness, I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
I can't imagine Mikel Arteta and Pep Guardiola have been on the phone going, if I do this and you do that, this is going to help me. And even though we were rivals last year, I do find it a
don't get me
bit
wrong, she's a smart girl,
Absolutely.
Annie. She's a smart girl, and she is entitled to an opinion. If her experiences relate to that, it's not worthy people parodying it, but I do think her views on this transaction are a little fanciful.
Yeah. Indeed. But it does seem as though Declan Rice then is Arsenal-bound. West Ham fans, lots of you already getting in touch this morning. Thank you very much. We'll read out some of your texts a little bit later on. Does he leave then West Ham as a legend? Or is there a slightly bitter taste in some of your mouths that he leaves to move to a London rival before really he's reached his peak? 03717 223344 is the number to call us on. You can also text us to 81089.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.